Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever episode of the RDX Sports Podcast. My name is Simon Head, Editor-in-Chief here at RDX Sports. And who better to join us for this inaugural first debut episode of the RDX Sports Podcast than a good friend of mine, a man who has been front row to some of the biggest moments in mixed martial arts history. The man who gets the first question in the press conference, the man who sits cage side, who you can sometimes see in that famous blue polo shirt with his hands on his head going, holy shit, after Max Holloway knocks out Justin Gaethje. Mr. John Morgan. John, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Yeah, it's been amazing how long we've been at this, man. We've seen some amazing moments. Me and you called some fights together as well. Don't forget that. So I mean, we've crossed paths on several occasions over the years. So it's been a fun journey. So I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, it's always good fun when we're sharing fight week together. It's been a little while, other than Apollo MMA a few weeks back, calling fights for the very first time. We should be doing a bit more of that as the year goes on. Stay tuned to our social media channels over the coming months. You will find out more about that. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about some of the hot button topics in mixed martial arts. There's a lot going on in the sport of MMA right now. And to be honest with you, it's kind of weird because it isn't just purely MMA. We're talking crossovers into boxing. We're talking about promotional shenanigans. We're talking about big name comebacks and whether they're ever going to actually happen. So we've got 5 topics here. We'll try and run through them at breakneck speed and bring you bang up to date with a bit of opinion from one of the most well-traveled journos in the sport. So John, let's kick things off with this past weekend at Honda Center in Anaheim, California. Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, the rematch. This time in boxing rather than mixed martial arts. Jorge won the BMF title against Nate Diaz at UFC 244. The Rock gives him the BMF belt. Everybody's happy. The BMF belt goes on and has a longer life than we thought it was going to. It was supposed to be one of one, right? But it's gone on and done some big things for the UFC since. But now they've had the rematch and it went the other way. Nate Diaz gets the majority decision victory over Masvidal. I'll be honest, I thought Masvidal won the fight, but I'm looking at it as an MMA guy, right? And I'm not a boxing scorer. I've watched lots of boxing matches, and I know they like to really accentuate the forward pressure. Whereas in MMA, we really look at the end product of the work, right? So it's more about the damage and how much of an impact it has. First question, I guess, is: did you see Nate Diaz winning that fight, or did you see Masvidal winning that fight?
It's funny because I kind of have to make the same caveat, right? That I'm not really a boxing judging expert. You know, mixed martial arts, I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds and fights and called them and commentated them and scored them in play-by-plays and those things. So I've had a lot of reps in it. Boxing, I see a lot less frequently just because my Saturday nights are usually taken up with mixed martial arts. So with that being said, I did think Jorge Masvidal won the fight. I thought he was landing the bigger shots. I thought he was, delivering with more power. But as you said, Nate Diaz was the one kind of walking forward a lot. So I guess if you're rewarding the ring generalship, so to speak, he was the one with the pressure and the volume. So I'm not going to sit here and call it controversy or robbery because I don't feel qualified as an expert to do so. I think I'm looking at it through that same MMA lens that you are. But I was a little bit surprised. I thought Masvidal had done enough to win it.
Yeah, and as an event, though, I would think it's an unqualified success, right? They packed the venue out. No idea what the ticket prices were, especially at the low end. But it's much better to be fighting in front of 10,000 fans when half of them are paying than a half full arena, right? So, when all of them are paying. So I don't know whether everybody in that building got in and actually paid for their ticket. But to be honest, I don't care so much because it gave us a real showpiece, a real spectacle. And the two fighters went out there and delivered. This wasn't just two grizzled veterans going out there and sort of phoning it in for a paycheck. They actually went out there and put on a bit of a show. And I think it shows that if you're committed enough to this, there is an avenue to make some additional cheddar outside of mixed martial arts. There's different avenues you can take, but especially for these two, boxing is an option for them if you can get the right level of opponent, right?
100%. From a financial standpoint, was the event profitable? I don't know. How many pay-per-views they sell, as you said, what were the tickets, priced at? Were they given away? Were they comped? Whatever. I don't know all that, right? So I don't know if it was a profitable venture, but I can tell you when I turned the pay-per-view off, I was like, man, that was fun. It was more fun than I expected it to be. I mean, I actually felt kind of guilty going into the fight that I wasn't as fired up as I thought maybe I should be, given who was competing. Two superstars of the sport, two guys who I love to watch fight. But I guess for me, I don't know. Once you're on that mixed martial arts bug and you've been hooked by that, I feel like boxing is lacking a little something. It's such a limited and defined set of rules. So I wasn't that fired up for it, but I thought they both, as you said, man, they did a good job. We know neither one of them is elite level boxing that's going to be a boxing world champion at the highest level, but I thought they both had good showings for themselves. They showed that they put in the effort. They went out there and they had a good entertaining scrap, and it was fun. And when it got done, I said great. And if they wanted to go box again, whether it be against themselves again in a rematch or somebody else, I would have no issue with that whatsoever, man. I think they showed that they're committed to the craft and, they're going to do their best out there. And to your point, it's absolutely an opportunity for these athletes to make more money. Mixed martial arts, especially at the highest level at the UFC, is hard on the body, man. It's not the fights themselves, right? It's the preparation process. It's the rounds of grappling and wrestling and everything that you have to get done. And it wears on your knees, it wears on your back, it just breaks you down, right? But when you can go out there and you're boxing, it's limited, right? At that point, you're just kind of you're doing cardio and you're training your punches, and you don't have to worry about everything else. And so if you can use your name value to go out there and get yourself an extra paycheck in a discipline that doesn't put maybe as much taxing on your body, why not take advantage of it? You've invested, you put the time in building your brand, go out there and take opportunities. So I like what these guys did. Both of them have said, hey, we'd like to end up back in the UFC at some point. And I think they both will. I think they were both intelligent to not burn any bridges, to go out there. I mean, heck, the event was carried on UFC Fight Pass. You know what I mean? That just goes to show you the type of partnership that the UFC was okay with. So great opportunities here for these guys. They both have a lot of options on the table.
Yeah, and it does beg the question, is that avenue of boxing something that could be a regular thing, not necessarily just for these two guys, but for fighters in general, when perhaps they're getting towards the end of their MMA career? You mentioned the training, and there's no doubt about it. If you can spar safely and smartly, and you don't have to worry about the grind that is just necessary in order to train wrestling and to roll for jiu-jitsu, like that's what really breaks the body down, right? If you can spar really, really smartly, you can add years to your career if you're just going into striking contests. So how viable is it for them to maybe step out of MMA, move into some sort of boxing realm, whether that be the creation of a promotion who looks to focus on that, or whether it be moving into other promotions who focus on striking only arts? How viable is this for some of these veterans like Diaz and Masvidal and people like that?
It's interesting, right? Because we've heard UFC CEO Dana White talk about Zuffa boxing and kicking the tires on that and wanting to get involved in that. So if Zuffa was involved, obviously, if Zuffa was involved, that would be an amazing opportunity. But I don't think they will. I don't know that they might not ever. But man, everything they do is just so, like, you don't want to screw up the mix right now. You got the recipe just right. You know what I mean? So don't know if you want to mess with that. But I do think there are certainly other opportunities. I mean, I look at like what BKFC is doing. I mean, they're certainly bringing in big names that made their stardom in UFC and other mixed martial arts organizations, and are coming to compete there. And I know, I mean, directly, we're talking about it kind of theoretically, but like I've had this conversation with Ben Rothwell a couple times where he's, said, look, I could do this for years. It may seem like it's harder, more, difficult or whatever, but because it's easier on me in preparation, I can do this a lot longer. We look at what Mike Perry has accomplished in BKFC and those sort of things. So, I mean, it's absolutely there. Karate Combat seems to be another organization as well. I mean, they're spending some big money as well and giving people opportunities. So I think there is. I don't know that there's necessarily the UFC needs to get involved into it, or there's, somebody needs to launch an organization that's just like, hey, we're the home for washed up UFC fighters that are coming to box. You know what I mean? Like, not that those guys are washed up, but you know what I'm saying. Nobody, I don't know if anybody wants to market it that way and approach it that way, but when you look at some of these organizations that are already out there, I think it's absolutely an opportunity for these guys to extend their careers, right? I mean, they've taken time to build their brand. They've taken time to teach themselves skills. And it's the hard part about this game, right? When you retire is at the moments your paychecks are the highest, right? Because that salary just keeps increasing every time you go out there. And so it's hard to walk away from it. And maybe this is an opportunity to walk away because it's difficult to compete at the highest level of mixed martial arts. But maybe there are other organizations and opportunities out there where guys can continue to get paid and support their families.
Yeah, and BKFC is obviously something that seems to be offering that. You look at someone like Mike Perry, who was always a crowd pleaser in the UFC, always produced good fights, always sold his fights really well, but never quite made it up to that sort of championship level. He's an absolute superstar in BKFC. He's like the face of the brand right now. And he's like, the synergy is absolutely perfect. it's, there aren't that many opportunities outside of the UFC to really become a legit star. If you're a combat sportsman and you don't just want to compete for world titles, or you can't quite compete for world titles, BKFC is offering, and they're offering decent money by the sounds of it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are. I mean, I think I don't want to say lowered the, I mean, in the beginning, look, they had to overpay. That's what you have to do, right? I mean, Scott Coker used to admit, hey, we had to overpay for guys sometimes because we're luring them away. They're trying to get into, a little bit more financially responsible association and make this thing profitable. So I don't know if they're necessarily just backing the Brinks truck up when it's unnecessary. But as you said, like, look at what, Mike Perry has been able to do for himself, and the way you can market yourself and the way you can brand yourself and all these things. So absolutely an opportunity. I think it's one that guys need to look. I think in the beginning when BKFC came out, a lot of people were like, "Ooh, bare knuckle fighting." I'll be honest, even me, I was like, I mean, we're trying to get safe, and we added gloves. I mean, this may be necessary, right? But then you see it, and it's like, well, no, it's you're going to get some cuts and lacerations. There's no question about that. It's definitely, if blood makes you squeamish, it's not necessarily for you, but it's not necessarily like any more unsafe. And in fact, in a lot of ways, we've talked about this over the years. The invention of gloves, remember, was not made to protect the brain. It was made to protect the hands. You know what I mean? So bare knuckle, sometimes you end up taking less shots. So look, I think it's gaining acceptance. Conor McGregor is associated with the brand now. That's certainly going to open the doors for some blue chip sponsors and associations and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think there's absolutely opportunities out there. And like I said, we'll mention Karate Combat as well. I know some guys have been going over there and get some nice paychecks as well. So, some of these striking only disciplines, man, I think it is an opportunity for athletes to compete and extend their careers a little bit.
And speaking of extending their careers, Nate Diaz has said he's interested in going back to the UFC. Jorge Masvidal said he's interested in going back to the UFC. Conor McGregor isn't really in a position to be fighting for championships at the moment. Guaranteed if he wins one fight, you can bet he'll be after one. But are these the sort of matchups that we might see going down the line? I mean, obviously, we have no idea what Conor's going to do next. He's booked to face Chandler. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in terms of Nate and Jorge Masvidal, how much runway do they have left as UFC fighters if they were to jump back in? Are we talking maybe one or two more? Dustin Poirier was floated as a suggestion for Nate Diaz by John Anik the other day. They could face each other, Masvidal and Diaz, as in a trilogy match. McGregor is always an option when it comes to Nate Diaz. Chandler will fight anybody if it's a big paycheck. And to be honest, he's been sitting out long enough. I think he just wants to fight at this point. So in terms of Diaz and Masvidal, if you're fantasy booking the pair of them, what direction would you take with these two?
Yeah, I mean, the one that screams out to me is Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3, right? The trilogy matchup. I mean, those are two of the most marketable guys in the sport, and they have a history, you know what I mean, and a very contentious history, of course, a very entertaining history. And I've said it for years, but I'll keep saying it. It doesn't matter what happens in the lead up to that fight. Those dudes could both be on 10-fight losing streaks. You pair them up together, they're still going to sell 1 million pay-per-views. You know what I mean? People, it's just their personalities, it's their fan base, it's who they are. So I think that one's got to happen at some point. As you said, we'll talk about Conor. There's no guarantees right now on how many things he's going to have, but assuming that he's around and the Notorious is competing, then I think you got to do that one. And I like that, the idea of, you could do Masvidal and Diaz again in a rematch there. I mean, you could do, the thing is, those guys are both in such unique positions where it's like, there's very few guys that it doesn't matter. They can literally fight anybody in the game. I mean, nobody's going to turn down a fight with them because they're all such superstars and they can make anything interesting. So, I don't see either one of them, fighting some 24-year-old up and coming contender that looks like the next big thing. I just don't think that would interest any of them. It's somebody that's not recognizable, but the names you shared like that, a Justin Gaethje, a Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, all those names you mentioned, they're all viable. So, short answer in terms of how long do they have left, I think you were right on. I think, 2-3 more fights tops, for either one of them. I think they're both kind of at the end. And I think it's got to be a name to interest them. And I think the names that'll interest them most will be the ones that are A, recognizable, and B, you just know it's going to be a fun fight because that's what they're going to want to be in at this point in their career. I don't think either of them is making a title run upon return to the UFC, but they're superstars of the sport, man, and they deserve to be on pay-per-view and they deserve big paychecks. So you got to kind of think of those quote-unquote fun fights that would make sense for them.
Let me just go back to that last point you made there about they're not going to make a title run. And that makes absolute common sense. But in the UFC, common sense doesn't always apply, right? If it makes dollars, it makes sense. Nate Diaz and Leon Edwards have a little bit of a history, right? Leon Edwards beat him relatively comfortably if you look at the entire fight. But in the last 30 to 45 seconds of that fight, Nate had Leon on skates, right? So, and that's the thing that was the big takeaway from the fight. That was the thing that a lot of the fans walked away from the fight freshest in their minds. You know, Nate was that close. Nate was that close. Is there a scenario where Leon could go out there, defend his title against Bilal, and Nate comes back to the UFC, and the UFC just goes, you know, full YOLO and says, right, let's just book this. Let's just book this. It's Leon in a big fight. It's a big pay-per-view fight for Leon. It's a huge fight for Nate Diaz. It's an opportunity for one of the biggest fan favorites in the sport to go for a title. And common sense would suggest that Leon would win the fight relatively comfortably just because of his overall skill set. But there's that one little snippet of doubt, that one little sliver of doubt, which was the last few seconds, last minute or so of that first fight. Is that viable? Could that actually happen?
I'm glad you asked this question because I actually was talking with my boy Eric McMahon about this on Cage Side with John Moore. We had this exact conversation. And I said, look, it does sound a little bit crazy, but if Leon's into it, you know what I mean? I think there's a way to sell it, right? Because I think Leon Edwards would have to be into it, and he'd have to be like, you know what, man? Because Nate's going to call, Nate mentioned, hey, I'd like to fight him again, right? But Leon could easily say, like, bro, like, I beat you pretty clearly and soundly. Like, I want to put other names on my resume. But if Leon wants it, and Leon might want it. He won the fight pretty comfortably other than that one part, right? So he probably feels like it's a matchup that favors him. And I think we would all agree it probably is a matchup that favors him. But it's just whether or not he wants to do it. It would be, I think, a big paycheck because anytime Nate Diaz is involved. But if Leon were to come out and to play along and be like, all right, yeah, I'm down for that, and play along with it and be like, hey, man, I whipped your ass for 24 and a half minutes, and you got that 1 second on me, man. But I'm telling you right now, I want to run it back with you because I'm going to show you that was luck. I let my guard down for 1 second, and you got lucky. You don't even deserve to be in the same octagon as me, and I'm going to beat you pillar to post for 25 minutes. In fact, I'm not even going to let it go that far. I'm going to finish you this time around. I whitewashed you last time on the cards. This time, man, I'm going to absolutely destroy you, and I'm going to finish you. And, yeah, does it make any sense that he's coming back in and fighting for a title? No. But as you said, if it makes dollars, it makes sense, And so it could happen. It's an out there scenario, and Leon would have to be involved in it as well. But if he is, you could put it together. And the UFC marketing machine, man. They come out and they'll play that highlight over and over. Because, hey, I'll be honest with you, man. I think if Nate hadn't clowned on him a little bit, he had a chance to finish the fight. But, he was doing what he does and playing to the crowd. I was like, oh, my God, is this really going to happen? I remember sitting there, Case, I can't believe this. So I don't think it's a likely scenario. But if all parties are involved, want to do it, you could pull it off.
Michael Bisping fought Dan Henderson at UFC 204 when that fight was a million miles away from sort of when it comes to meritocracy and what made sense in a division. That fight shouldn't have been booked, but it had a narrative. It had a storyline. Everybody was bought in and the fight happened. So you never know. You never know. It's just Leon isn't that sort of character who would get up there and bang the table and start trash talking like that in order to make something like that happen. He's got a lot on his plate at 170 pounds, starting with Bilal at UFC 304. But, the contenders who are starting to queue up at 170, he's going to be a busy boy if he holds onto that title later on this month, for sure. Now, I suppose it is still 170 pounds, I think, if it actually takes place at 170 pounds. If it takes place at all, Michael Chandler, Conor McGregor. First one, yes, no. Is this fight going to happen?
Oh, man. So many variables in it. Right now, I'll say yes. I talked to Michael Chandler when he was in town for International Fight Week. Talked to him on camera, talked to him off camera, and it seems like he's still pretty committed to this, right? But after the event, I asked Dana White, like, hey, you said you don't want to talk about Conor McGregor until he's healthy. Well, do you want to talk about Michael Chandler? What should he do? And Dana was like, look, I'm not a fan of guys waiting, but Michael Chandler's made a lot of money, and Michael said that too, right? They're like, hey, I'm good. My other businesses are fine. I don't need the paycheck. I don't have to compete. So I'm still leaning towards yes. But I'm telling you, man, I was that guy that was 100%, for years, people were saying Conor's never fighting again. And I'd look him in the face and say, you're wrong. You don't know this guy. You know what I mean? Yes, he's out there playing on his luxury yachts as he has. Conor's already won the game, right? I mean, in the game of life, in the game of combat sports, he won. He got the money. It's prize fighting. He got more prize than anybody ever in history, right? He did it. He doesn't need to prove anything. But we know that guy. We know the drive and the competition and the burn that's inside of him. So I was like, you guys are wrong. This dude is going to fight again. And then when he pulled out this time, I know a lot of people are talking trash and making fun of him. It's a pinky toe. How can that keep you out? But I mean, it does, screw with your weight distribution and whether or not you can throw that kick. And it did look pretty nasty, to be honest with you. Even if it was a pinky toe, it looked pretty bad. So I give him a pass. But now I'm kind of at that, like, okay, I'm 99% sure he's going to fight again. Like, there is maybe that 1% of me that's like, oh, maybe you guys have been right all along. So long answer to your short question. But for now, I still say yes. And if it doesn't, it's just because Michael Chandler goes out and it takes another fight. And if he wins, he can still take that fight. I got to believe that there's something in his contract that gives him like a higher revenue if he faces Conor McGregor than anybody else, because otherwise he would have taken it by now. I mean, it's a great legacy fight, but it's not a legacy fight worth not fighting any other fights unless there's a huge paycheck attached to it as well. So if he takes another fight and wins, it's still on the table. If he takes another fight and loses, I mean, I can see, you would hope that Conor would be like, bro, it's fine. You lost. We had this agreement. It was my fault. It didn't happen until now. Let's still fight. But I don't think that's the game Conor plays. You know what I mean?
No.
Conor's going to be like, hey, you were supposed to wait for me. You didn't. You messed up, chump. You missed out on the payday. You're never having red panty night. I'm out.
Yeah. It's if you're Chandler, you're into this horrible sort of no man's land of decision making where it's like you're one slip up away from completely fumbling the bag entirely, but the bag might already have gone. The bag may never have been real to begin with. It might just not have happened anyway. So it's tough. I mean, from Conor's standpoint, I understand why he's not fighting with a broken toe, even though everyone's saying, yes, it's a pinky toe. He's been out for 2 years. He's had a horrific injury, and he's in that sort of latter part of his MMA career, probably, right? Why come back if you're not 100%? If anyone can sit and wait, it's him, right? He has got the money in the bank. He could get himself 100, he can get himself 200% fit and then come back. He can do whatever he wants. But Michael Chandler's in a horrible position because anybody he takes other than Conor McGregor, arguably, for it to be a fight of any scale, arguably could be a more difficult fight than Conor McGregor coming back off a 2-week layoff. So sorry, 2-week layoff, 2-year layoff. It's a horrible catch-22 for Michael Chandler. And personally, I would love to see that fight happen. I hope that it does come together, and maybe the show at Sphere, it's the landing point for it. If not there, maybe a bit later on in the year, even if it's the December show in Vegas. I don't know if they'd do the fight in New York. I think New York probably take too much money out of the pay packet.
And I think that's going to be John Jones as well. You know
Yes.
what I mean? And if you have John Jones and Conor McGregor on a card, is either one of them going to agree to be co-main event? Like, that's not happening. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think December is probably likely in Vegas. But look, the Sphere, I'm sure we'll get an announcement any day on the Sphere. But it's weird, right? Because Conor's been talking about the Sphere all along. And I don't know if the UFC brass would be a little bit like, oh, this dude just hosed us on International Fight Week just so he could get on the Sphere card. But look, Dana's talked about how expensive this event is going to be, right? He wants it to be the biggest gate ever. It's going to be the biggest expense ever. You got Saudi Arabia involved now as a presenting sponsor as well. And maybe they're like, hey, how's that Irish guy doing? We sure would like to see him on this card. We're paying you millions of dollars for. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, I don't think. But I would think probably December in Vegas is most likely.
Yeah, so we've covered Diaz and Masvidal. We've covered a bit of MMA boxing crossover. We've covered Chandler versus McGregor. By the way, before we move on from Chandler v. McGregor, let's say, for argument's sake, Conor says he's out for the rest of 2024. Let's just say, look, I'll come back next International Fight Week, or I'll come back next. And Chandler says, look, I need to move on. Chandler's been making a few little noises on social media, which is very smart of him, because he's just, A, he's keeping himself in the conversation, and B, he's like a little fisherman. He's casting lines here and there, seeing if he can get a bite off different people. Nate Diaz is one that he's mentioned. And, I think that would be a viable matchup for him. I think if you're Michael Chandler, you would very much fancy your chances of getting in and out of a Nate Diaz fight unscathed, while still being able to go in there and fight a legit name. Is that probably is that the the next best option for him, do you think?
I think so, because I think exactly what you said. It's a fight. The other option. He's like, hey, I'm possibly a title fight. Is the Mahashev like? That's a tough one. I think he's probably got Arman Sarukian in Abu Dhabi anyway. So I don't think that necessarily lines up. But I think you're absolutely right. Because what's he looking for? He's looking for a fight that is star power, right? I mean, he said all along, right? I'm not in the UFC for a long time. I'm here for a good time. You know what I mean? And he's had a good time, man. He's fought the biggest names. I mean, you look at who he's fought. Like all the names that you'd be like, okay, well, you want a big superstar that's a fun fight. Well, how about Poirier? Already fought him. How about Gaethje? Already fought him. How about Oliveira? Already fought. I mean, this dude has fought the best of the best and the most fun of the most fun. So Nate Diaz, I mean, not that you can replace a name like Conor McGregor. You can't. He's the biggest star in the history of the sport. But I absolutely like what you said. I think he would like the fight stylistically and fancy his chances in there. And it also would be a big money fight that would still leave that Conor fight on the table for him financially. So I saw that suggestion they made on social media. By the way, I like spicy Michael Chandler on Twitter lately. He's been kind of throwing some darts out there. He's been fun. But yeah, I think that'd be a great one, man. I think that'd be a fun matchup. I think fans would get it and get into it. And I think it would bring some money. So I think that, could be a possibility.
Yeah, looking forward to. I just want to see him booked. Ideally for him, it's obviously McGregor, and it'd be great to see McGregor back. But if it isn't going to be McGregor, I'd like to see Chandler booked before the end of the year for sure.
You just want the guy to get back
so long.
You just want the guy to get back in the gym, right? I mean, he's clearly letting himself go these days, and that dude is a maniac, man. That dude is always in shape, always working out. But yeah, I'd love to see him get booked too. I mean, look, he said financially he's doing all right. The investments and the things that he's made throughout his career. He was in town promoting his tequila company that he's a part of as well, Hiatus. So he's doing well financially. So it's not as if, hey, man, if the guy doesn't get booked, they're going to come collecting for the mortgage payment or whatever. He's good, but he's a competitor. He likes to compete, and he's fun. When he goes out there, he throws down. Win or lose, if Michael Chandler's fighting, you want to watch him compete. So I agree. Hopefully they get something booked soon.
And I'd love to know, I don't know if you asked him, what came first, the hiatus or the name hiatus for the tequila? Was it named after his time off, or was it just a pure coincidence? Because it's incredible brand synergy, if not.
It was an existing brand. Yeah. So it was just like, now it's funny now that you say, because I didn't ask him that question, but I did talk to him about it. Now you wonder if it was a curse, right? Like he bought into this company and then he got forced on hiatus. You know what I mean?
That's
but
it.
It is great brand synergy. I loved it when the fight got canceled. I mean, he immediately went to social media and showed himself pouring some tequila, and he's like, well, back on hiatus. I loved it.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. And one thing that's going to be off hiatus very soon is the UFC in the UK. We've had to wait a little while, but they're coming back with an absolutely huge card. UFC 304 at the end of this month in Manchester, taking place in the middle of the night, which still I don't quite understand, but it is what it is. I don't think that's going to change at any point soon. But we have 2 title fights. This is MMA history for the UK. We've never had 2 UFC champions concurrently before, and we've never had 2 UFC title fights with British fighters on the same card. So historic stuff. We've got Leon taking on Bilal Muhammad in the main event. Leon, obviously the undisputed champion, taking top billing over Tom Aspinall, who is the interim champion. And I almost feel like interim should be put in quotation marks because he feels like the real champion at this point. All due respect to John Jones and everything he's achieved in the sport, but it feels like John Jones has got his own little Legends division going on, aside from the main UFC heavyweight division, which Tom Aspinall seems to be conducting the main sort of business in there. He's taken on Curtis Blades in a fight that there's a real redemption arc there, arguably for both men. You've got Curtis Blades, who's probably one of the most underrated or underrespected contenders in the UFC heavyweight division. He's been in that between sort of top 3, top 5 for probably the last 6 or 7 years. I'd probably guess he's been there or thereabouts. He's been one fight away from a title shot probably 3 or 4 times and has just lost out. He's been, a model of consistency in terms of being able to stick around in a division where it's pretty hard to stick around at that very, very top level. Then you've got Tom Aspinall, who has sort of soared to the top of the division, had that horrific knee injury early on against Blades in London. Now they get to run it back. Aspinall wants to prove his point. Blades, who was doing okay, it's hard to judge, right? The fight only lasted about sort of 60 seconds or something. But Blades was already connecting with good shots at that point. So he'll fancy his chances as well. He thought that fight was going okay until the injury. fascinating matchup. Let's talk about that co-main event. We're probably 2-3 weeks out from the fight, but what are your sort of early assessments as you sort of go into this? Because you've got a seasoned campaigner versus a rising star who has a belt around his shoulder.
Yeah, what's funny is I really loved the fight the first time around ahead of time. You know what I mean? I thought this was a great matchup to really see where Tom Aspinall is at. Not that he really has anything to prove necessarily. I mean, the win over Sergey Pavlovich, I mean, that proved a heck of a lot, especially the way he did it. But some of the other names kind of hadn't beaten the top tier of the division, and Curtis Blades is the top tier of the division. You outlined the resume that he has, and he's been right there at the top for a very, very long time, a number of key victories throughout his career. So I love this matchup. Again, on paper, I think Curtis Blades is one of the toughest stylistic matchups for Tom Aspinall out of all the heavyweights. And so that's one thing that I really loved about too, because it's not just about pedigree, it's about styles as well. You know what I mean? So this is a very, very tough test for Tom Aspinall. And I don't think it's one that, I'm sure the British fans aren't overlooking Curtis Blades. I know it may be easy to kind of write him off sometimes as, he's the boring wrestler guy, he's not. He's very, very good. He's a very, very tough test. I do believe Tom Aspinall is elite. The guy looks like he's going to be at the top of the division for a long time. Whether or not we see him fight John Jones, it's still a lot of things to unfold there. But Tom Aspinall looks like the real genuine article to me, man. He's the real deal. So I do like Tom Aspinall in this matchup. I do think, man, he's a phenomenal athlete. He's phenomenal on the mic. The backstory is amazing as well. I mean, he just seems like a phenomenal dude all the way around. So I think Tom Aspinall is the real deal. I favor him in this matchup. But I'm telling you right now, you cannot discount Curtis Blades, man. He is as tough as they come. His wrestling is going to make it very difficult for Tom Aspinall. He's a big guy. He's improving his striking all the way around as well. So this is a very intriguing matchup. I loved it the first time. I felt like we got robbed of a fight in that one. Obviously, You were gutted for Tom Aspinall, number one, because you knew that he was going to have a year out after that, right, with an injury like that. But as a fan, it just felt like we were kind of robbed of what was going to be an amazing fight. Now I think we'll get that amazing fight.
Yeah, and Curtis Blades, I don't know if you remember, we were both there for his UFC debut in Zagreb in Croatia. That main card was almost entirely heavyweight fights, if I remember rightly. And he fought an unknown by the name of Francis Ngannou, who was having, I think it was his second UFC fight at the time. And Francis won that fight. I think he stopped Curtis, basically it's a doctor stoppage. But
Correct.
After that fight, Blaze just went on a bit of a tear and climbed the ranks of the heavyweight division and has basically been a contender ever since. I think he doesn't get the respect that he deserves. He isn't the most natural interviewee. He gets out there and expresses himself much better now than he did when he first got to the UFC. But he's not a natural salesman when it comes to sort of selling fights. But what he is and he's developed his game. You mentioned the wrestling. He's added the striking to that, and he's a big guy. I think he definitely cuts to make 265. He's one of the bigger heavyweights in the division, and that's going to be a real test for Tom Aspinall. Throwing it forward to the main event, it's another rematch. It's another redemption story. But the redemption is on the side. Well, the redemption could be for either man, really. I mean, Leon Edwards took on Bilal Muhammad. Looked like Leon was doing okay in that fight. Unfortunate eye pokes are like the worst thing in MMA, and whoever can invent a way to prevent eye pokes should be a multi-millionaire, because they are the scourge of the sport in terms of the athlete. People get kicked in the plums. It happens. People get hit around the back of the head. It happens. Eye pokes are just horrible because it's just the most pain I've ever had is when I got poked in the eye. It was absolutely the worst thing. And to see a fight of that caliber ended the way it was, it kind of robbed us. Leon would have thought it robbed him of a dominant win. Bilal would think that it robbed him of the chance to go out there and beat one of the top contenders at the time. Now the championship belt is on the line. Bilal has improved, I think, hugely since that fight. Leon has developed as well. How different do you think this fight's going to be? Eye poke aside, how different do you think this fight's going to be second time around? Because they're both in very different points in their career now.
Well, I think you said it. I mean, I think there's a lot of growth on both sides. And I know it's easy to write off Bilal Muhammad as well as somebody, again, not the biggest talker in the world, maybe not always the most exciting fighting style, but incredibly effective in what he does. And yeah, that eye poke was incredibly unfortunate, especially, man, when you talk to Bilal, like couldn't see out of his eye. I mean, you're thinking at that moment, my career might be over, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just this fight. So it was a scary, scary moment for him. I know Leon was frustrated about it, and Leon looked good in that fight. You know, he really did. But I do think it has the potential to be a different fight. But it's different both ways. I mean, Leon right now is just galvanized by what he's done. I mean, this run that he's on right now is so incredible, man. I mean, it really is. It's cool to see, right? A guy that was kind of lurking in the background for a lot of time. I mean, in many ways, I would say Leon Edwards was in Bilal Muhammad's position, where it was like he was winning fights, but I don't ever remember people talking about, well, that's the guy that's going to be holding the belt sometime. You know what I mean? But then he goes out and has the amazing performances against Usman and just the run that he continues to be on. So he's galvanized and he's on a different level. He's performing, you know, beyond himself at this point. But Bilal, again, has really improved his skill set. He's got that mindset as well. I mean, training alongside Khabib Nurmagomedov and that whole team over there, and what they do for you, not only in terms of physically, but mentally and psychologically as well. So I think this is a really good fight as well. I do think Leon Edwards, his takedown defense is incredible, right? And I do think he's the better striker out of the two. So, you know, I do favor Leon in this matchup. So in both these matchups, I'm favoring the Englishman to take home the wins. But it's again, I would say this is not a contender to be overlooked. This is a great fight. I'm glad it's happening. The history between them makes it a little bit more interesting. And it's a great fight. It is a shame it's happening in the middle of the night. I feel bad for your countrymen over there, man. I know what that's like. We did it, right? It's a long night.
Man.
I feel bad for that, but I do think there's a possibility for 2 wins, but it's going to be 2 stiff tests for sure.
Yeah, and that's, you know, you sort of hinted at it there. We both were in Manchester for UFC 204, which was also held at US pay-per-view prime time, and the way that we dealt with it was a little bit unusual, but it kind of worked for us, right?
It did. It did. You know, listen, we just decided we'd stay up all week long. I was like, guys, let's just stay on US time. And so, you know, we might have had a frosty beverage or two during the course of the week to help ourselves stay up, but that was all medically prescribed, you know what I mean? Just to keep us on the right time. And yeah, it worked. It was funny though, because you know, we were lasting all night long, all week long. But then on fight night, it was funny to see all of our peers that were kind of like nodding off as the night was going on. And understandably so. It's like 4:00 in the morning and we were going strong. It worked out for us.
Yeah, the UFC PR team were hanging out, handed out cans of Monster on press row that night. I remember that. I remember that vividly. But interesting question with this is, obviously, when you're a UK fighter fighting on home soil, the British fight fans are incredible. You know, whenever the English national team are playing football, obviously we're doing great in the Euros right now. Just reached the final. The fans are just incredible. When the England rugby team plays at home, amazing atmosphere. When an English fighter, whether it be boxing or MMA, gets in the ring, gets in the cage, and they've got a packed arena behind them, it just elevates their performance. But with the fight taking place at US time, how much does that maybe level the playing field a little bit? Whereas you take someone like Bilal or someone like Curtis, they've got to fly over, and that's, you know, that can be a draining process anyway. It's like from the West Coast, it's like a 10 to 12 hour flight, depending on the route you end up taking. But it's a long flight. But in terms of acclimatization and changing your routine, you don't have to do it as much. Obviously, it's going to be a bit weird because it's going to be dark when you expect it to be light, and so on and so on. But how much do you think that might just sort of level the playing field a little bit?
It definitely can. And I think back to Fight Island, right? Because we saw a lot of this, you know, and because everybody, you know, we were still fighting on US times, but it was in the middle of the Middle East. So we were fighting in, you know, everybody was competing in the middle of the night. And it was funny because, you know, obviously everybody remembers what the world was like at that time. So nobody complained because everybody was just happy to be fighting. It was like, whatever, dude, we'll fight in the middle of the night. But as it wore on, you did start to hear little rumblings like, dude, fight week was not easy for me, man. Like we weren't sleeping very well. And, you know, it was very difficult. So, I mean, it may be difficult to factor in like how much that matters, but it matters, especially when you're talking about championship level fights. I mean, you're talking about 1% difference here and there makes a big thing. So I think it really is something to pay attention to is, you know, how does everybody look? What's the energy level look like at the press conference? What does the energy level look like on media day? You know, are they coming in with a coffee and yawning a whole lot and that sort of thing, you know, because I mean, you know, Leon is going to have to adjust to the time too. I mean, it doesn't make, I would imagine, you know, Leon, I haven't talked to him yet. We will as we get closer, but I'm sure he started changing his schedule to make sure that it matched. Like, it doesn't make sense to stay on normal British time all the way up to a fight week and then switch it. You know what I mean? As you said, it might be easier for Bilal because it's essentially his same time as long as he can get the sleep right. So it is something to pay attention to. It is a real factor. You know, I mean, obviously a fist fight's a fist fight. And what matters is, you know, whose fist lands on the chin clean, right? Sometimes I think, you know, we almost put too much into intangibles, right? I mean, you're trying to look at every aspect of it. I think this is one of those intangibles that really does matter. I mean, if you're a little bit groggy, I mean, look, talking about Francis Ngannou, right? Didn't he admit that in the last one, you know, he didn't against Joshua, he was really tired and he was having trouble and he was at the arena too early. And these are big things. They matter. So it is going to be something to monitor on fight week.
Yeah, looking forward to UFC 304. Leon Edwards, of course, ambassador for a certain RDX Sports. So the RDX team, I'm sure, will be out in Manchester.
He's winning 100%. Yeah. Did I say that it's not even competitive?
There you go. There you go. But he's going to be obviously looking to end the night on a high. Tom Aspinall will be looking to tee him up nicely. Should be a great night. Load of other British stars lined up on that card. Let's finish things off with this one, John. With just a little bit of any other business, you know, whatever it is you want to chat about. I mean, one of the things I did want to ask you about, and in some ways it's kind of happening with myself as well. The pair of us both sort of started covering this sport and we were just journalists, right? We're there, we're reporting on the sport week in, week out. Your career has taken a slightly different turn over the last few years. And I don't think I've ever seen you enjoying yourself so much. You know, you seem to be absolutely in the zone right now and you're doing all sorts. Give us a bit of an update on what things are happening, you know, how are things with you right now in terms of what you're doing, the different projects you're working with and where people can check out what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been an adjustment, man. It's been a shift, but it's one that I was trying to balance both. And that's with commentary. I mean, working with CFFC, I absolutely love it. And it was a passion that I had all along. And, you know, when I was working with MMA Junkie and USA Today for a few years, they made me stop. And then after a while, they were like, okay, you can do it again. And then it became kind of a difficult balance of taking the time off. And finally, I had to make a decision. I was like, you know what? I want to go all in on commentary because I absolutely love doing it. You know, I call the MMA fights with CM Punk, who's become a good friend. I mean, I never thought, you know, the guy that doesn't watch any pro wrestling whatsoever, I never saw CM Punk wrestle during his entire career, right? He came to the UFC and I had to look on his Wikipedia page for facts to write about him when we were writing about his signing because I knew nothing. And I absolutely love the guy and I love working with him. And now we're doing submission grappling. We're doing Muay Thai. We're doing Division I college wrestling, all with CFFC as well. The college wrestling, I have commentated on a couple of them, but I've been working on the production side of it as well. So I'm learning the production side of everything. So I love it, man. I'm absolutely enjoying the heck out of it. It's a great organization. Rob Haydak leads an amazing team over there. And it's been a real blast doing it. But then I still get to cover mixed martial arts as well. I still do the MMA Roadshow that we've been doing, just talking to Ken Hathaway, Cold Coffee, just yesterday. We're at like 9.5 years. We're coming up on 10 years of doing that podcast together, which is insane. I mean, we're doing it every week together. So that's fun. And then also working with Grind City Media, which is a cool company. It's owned by the NBA's Memphis Grizzlies as well. And doing a podcast there with Eric McMahon, who's a licensed referee, in addition to working with the Memphis Grizzlies. So it's fun to talk to him. That's Cage Side with John Morgan, so you can check that out anywhere you listen to podcasts. But it's great to get his perspective on things because he's a licensed referee. He's done some UFC fights as well. So we get to break down analysis and stuff like that. It's always interesting to hear his perspective because he's actually been in there and done that. So yeah, man, it's a blast. It was a hard decision to walk away from MMA Junkie because man, you know how passionate I was about that company and you know, we built it from nothing. And you know, I was employee number one that Dan Stupp hired, and that's how I got into the industry. And I'll always be thankful to Dan Stupp for giving me that opportunity. So it was hard to make the decision to walk away from it. But it's allowed me this opportunity to chase full time, which I love working with CFFC. Obviously, still work with Tough Enough here in Las Vegas as well. Get up to Canada for Fight League Atlantic a handful of times a year. Working with Apollo MMA over in Belgium, and it's to me what it is. It's a different way to tell the story. You know, one of the reasons I really loved covering the sport was the opportunity to tell the story of these athletes, man. Because I know that you feel the same way, man. These athletes, these men and women that do this, are incredible, man. I feel like they're the greatest athletes on the planet. The sacrifices that they make, it's unbelievable. And so this is just like a different way to help tell the story. And now I think it's, you know, you look at, you know, the media outlets now. I mean, half the stories are about, you know, reporting on what somebody said on their own podcast, right? Now, like everybody, all the athletes, they don't really need the media to help get their messages out anymore. They can direct that on their own. And so now I still get a chance to cover the sport, but I get to tell these stories from a different perspective. And I absolutely love it, man. So it's been a change. It's been an adjustment, but man, I'm blessed.
And it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you on this very first episode of the RDX podcast. I'm sure we will get behind the mic again at some point in the near future. We will absolutely get on the mic again to call some fights a little bit further down the line this year. Look out for news on that. I think we're looking November time in Mons, Belgium for Apollo MMA 2. So don't forget to keep your eyes peeled on that. John, great chopping it up with you this week for the very first episode of the RDX Sports podcast. Take care of yourself, and thanks to everybody out there for checking out the first episode. Follow us on the socials at RDX Sports. Follow me at Simon Head Sport. John, you are at
John Morgan _MMA on X, or John Morgan MMA on IG.
Great stuff. Enjoy the fights this weekend, ladies and gentlemen, and we will be back in a week's time.